Is it possible to make one person with Excel skills to replace a team of 5 software developers? And can this one person be made to deliver with better quality and better throughput than the team of 5? To answer these questions, I will start with an Excel template. This is the sales invoice tracker template. So in this you have different sheets that represents the data. So this is the customer sheet. And you enter rows, and when you do, you can switch to see the invoices. But I need to create an invoice as well. 2 invoices, and they are connected to a company. So what Excel does is that it brings all these data sheets together in the front sheet that represent the view. So here you switch between different invoices and then you see the details. But I haven't added any details for my newly added invoices. So I'm going to do that as well. This is an invoice detail, and then you connect it to an existing invoice. And you enter some values. So now I can see there are invoice details in the main tab showing the invoice. What this Excel solution has done is actually built the understanding of how data is connected to each other. We have the invoices, the customer, and the invoices details. But let's do the same understanding with the MDriven. So in MDriven we work with models, and everything that's a data sheet in Excel here is actually an information class. So we would name the things invoice and invoice detail and customer. Just to make things clear, I'm going to give them the same colors as the tabs in the Excel sheet. Once we have done that, we can do the columns from Excel, because those are actually attributes of the information classes. And just as in Excel you have possibility to set a lot of different types on the cells, you do the same thing in MDriven. You choose what type you should have on a specific attribute. The question mark at the end just denotes that it's nullable, that it can be left empty. This is typical of Excel, but it's good practice. Let's see, maybe I did something wrong here. I pasted over or wrote over an expression. This is one of the issues with Excel. It's easy to destroy the formulas. I'll repair that one. In MDriven, when you have something that is calculated, we call it derived. So you change the type of the attribute from persistent, that it's saved, to derived. And we will look at a bit later on how to enter the formulas, or the expressions as we call them in MDriven. The quantity I made an integer because we separate doubles, which is floating point values, from integers, which is whole values like quantities, etc. In Excel you have formulas, but we call them expressions. So what you do is actually that you write expressions in a specific language, which is a standard object constraint language. This is part of the UML standard. So it's just as easy, and even easier, as we will see, writing expressions with MDriven as it is with formulas in Excel. As you do formulas, you get a complete cross-reference so you can follow up where things are used at a later date. When it comes to these relations that Excel does, like the invoice, from an invoice details, it's defined by a region name. And the region name is defined to be a specific location in your sheet. In MDriven, this is much simpler. You just do an association or a relation between two information clauses and give them specific names. Same for the customer or company, whichever it is. It's the customer lookup, data validation. But this is some kind of confusing, company versus customer. What is it? Well, I say the information clause should be called company and the relation should be called customer. It will be much clearer later on. So now we can do some of the derivations that we deferred before. We can follow relations that has names and simply use math functions to sum things up. So self the detailed total times 1 plus the tax rate plus the other expenses minus the deposit. So these expressions are just as simple as the Excel formulas. Okay, so far, what makes MDriven easier than Excel? Well, we have a clear picture of data and relations in MDriven. In Excel you have cells that get names by regions and regions, named regions, used in validations for other cells. Or in expression. Like we see here in the company relation, there's a data validation that ties into a named region. And secondly, in MDriven the use of relations reduce the need to use formulas or expressions for otherwise obvious simple things. So once expressions are needed in MDriven, they always use names, the language of the solution you create. And in Excel you can make use of names, but must first define the names as regions. You will often just use cell reference instead of names. That makes it harder to read. Like in Excel we have this formula to calculate the total, the invoice total, but the same formula in MDriven is actually easier. In MDriven everything is strongly typed and it gives you clear error messages when things are not coherent or lining up. So this helps you a lot when building larger solutions. Let's take a look at this expression here for the invoice total. If something were misspelled or wrong, it would clearly state so that what is not found and how to fix it. In Excel it works a bit differently. You will get some information that it will not work, but you don't get any collection of error messages that you can work through at a later point. So let's look at view design or data display. So in MDriven you always use the language of the model, and this really helps you as your system grows. It's easier to explain to others the current definitions in the system, and much easier to remember to look it up in the model at a later date. In Excel you have all these rather hefty formulas for things, referring into your sheets and pulling together information from different places. Let's do auto forms in MDriven. This actually creates some suggestions of data views based on what you have in the model. And you get one document view per information class, but you also get the seeker forms, which makes it possible for you to search the database for specific objects. So in MDriven you deploy a web application reachable from any platform your users use, and you don't need any extra install or something like that. We have a built-in prototyper to show you this. It's the turnkey prototyper. It starts up a little web server and you can go to it locally on your machine and use the information forms that you created in the view model designer. Of course, at a later date this will be published into the cloud so that you can so your users can reach this. So in this case we have the setting of relations, and we can actually influence how that should be done. I'm going to choose combo box for this relation, and for this relation I'm going to choose embed in document. We can also influence how the default string representation should be for a single object. If we just have an invoice, how should we present it? So I'm going to follow the link to the customer and say it's an invoice for. And for the company I'm going to say company name as the default representation. And for an invoice detail I'm going to follow the link up to invoice and then take index of in among all the invoice details for this invoice, and that will become a number. And I'm going to take the invoice name and append row. So that's one way to make easier read. So if I search one invoice, I can see that I can set the company by choosing it in a picker, and I can add invoice details. And as I add a row and save that, and let's see if I can, yeah, and then I see the row 1 and 2 there, 0 or 1 rather. Let's design a form from scratch. I'm going to say that this is requires a root because we want an invoice object, and I'm going to add an action to bring it up. And then I can choose from the things that is discovered in the model, and I can follow links, etc. to find things. And I want the company name there on the designed invoice, and the customer address. So I make these static so the user can't change them, just want to present them. Then I follow the link to the invoice details, and that will show up as a grid, and I add some columns to that grid. Apply some basic styling on that, and I refresh the application, and now I can see the design form like that. So in MDriven your definition of the system is separated from the usage of the system. So it's much confusion caused by accidental change of formulas in Excel. And that's completely removed. So the MDriven based system is multi-user by nature, and it's backed by a database. Not all the data needs to be available to all users. And the MDriven solution is much better suited for separation of concerns, like the customer has totally different use cases than you as a company owner that produces the invoices. And the MDriven solution makes it possible for you to implement authentication and authorization That's the core functions of information security. Who should see what? So having heard all these benefits of using MDriven, you might say that Excel is still Excel and I would never leave it. So what we have done is introduce the Excel plugin for MDriven, and that bridges the gap. So I hope you have got some insights into how you can replace a team of 5. One person doing the database, one person doing the back-end development, one person doing front-end JavaScript, and one person doing integration testing, and one person actually owning the gist of the idea of what you are doing. So this last person is you, the only one actually not replaceable by a machine. Thank you.